Hi everyone, and welcome to Teacher Series Part 2, the most common mistakes that we see. So, obviously, we mentioned some things last week, and not doing them would be big mistakes. So, we mentioned to keep it simple, as such, overcomplicating by picking super difficult topics or super complicated formats would be a bad idea. Narrowcasting would be a bad idea, i.e., only picking the smart kids, the political kids, the extroverts, whatever. Don't focus on the wrong stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this week, but essentially, you want to focus on just getting the kids practicing debates, saying relevant things, explaining their ideas. That's really the main focus. If you're focusing on anything else in feedback, you're probably focusing on the wrong stuff. We'll talk about that a bit more today. And lastly, expecting too much. They're students. They're going to take a while to get good. Don't expect too much. So, what are some other big mistakes that we see? So, one that we see a lot is schools that simply don't do enough competitions. And I do want to, this is not quite a simple one. Competitions are really, really fun. Even right now, I'm recording this in the time of COVID. It's 2020, so a lot of all competitions are online, which aren't as much fun as in-person competitions, but they're still fun. Students are competitive. They like to argue against kids they don't know from different schools. They like to get little rivalries going with other local schools. They like to argue. I mean, they're teenagers, right? They don't always want to just argue with their friends. So I think students really enjoy competitions, and it's also a good thing to work towards. Students know there's a competition in next month, they're more likely to show up to practice and take practice seriously and maybe even listen to feedback. You never know. You learn tons at competitions. This is students and teachers. Students learn a lot because they do a lot of practice in a competition. Some competitions, kids will do 3, 4, maybe even 5 debates. If you're having a weekly practice session where 6 kids get to debate every week and maybe you have a dozen or 15 kids come along, that means that your average student is maybe debating a couple times a month, and it's a lunchtime practice debate. It's not the most serious or the most intense practice. If you're doing an actual competition against other schools, and you might do 3 or 4 debates in a day, that's a lot of practice. That's really, really useful. So the best way to get good at something is always going to be practice. And this is a great way to get a lot of high quality practice with some good judging, some good motions, some good feedback, some good opponents. It's also good for you. It's good to network. It's good to meet other coaches, other teachers, other schools who are interested in debating, who might want to set up a little partnership, who might want to do some friendlies with you, who might have advice, who might know about the good competitions in your local area. Trying to penetrate the sort of niche world of competitive oracy can be quite difficult at first. Getting in those Facebook groups, those WhatsApp groups, and meeting other teachers and realizing which organizations, because there's a lot of oracy organizations now, as everyone's trying to make a career of it. And some of them are really good, but a lot of them are terrible. And it's basically just people who did debating at university or high school and now think they can do this as a job, rather than being people who are teachers, who are experienced in debating and really know how to get the best out of kids. And so knowing who to listen to and where to go and where to ask questions is a big part of becoming a really good debate coach or a teacher who can run a really solid debating club. And so competitions are great for that. I think another big thing, possibly for yourself, but definitely for the kids, is going to be to see what the next level looks like, or what maybe several levels above them look like. I think when you start debating, particularly if you're not from a traditional debate school, you don't really know what good debating looks like. I mean, yeah, you might have seen debating on the TV with politicians, but that's not always high quality debating. I mean, the first presidential debate this year was terrible debating by any stretch of the imagination. And so I think that knowing what high quality debating looks like isn't automatic. And so going along to some competitions and seeing some really good students perform really well can be good for kids to kind of see what the end goal of this process is. And seeing the end goal is always going to make it more likely that you pay attention in training, take on the feedback, and sort of practice in the right direction. Now, This all said, while I think competitions are really useful, and while I think probably if you start a debate club and you have some kids coming along regularly, you should be thinking about your first competition at about the 2 month mark, maybe a bit sooner. If you're waiting 6 months before you put any of your kids in a competition, you're probably being a bit too conservative. If you're not willing to go to a competition unless you think you can win it, stop. Do something else with your life because you're never going to win a competition the first time you go, and it's just unrealistic. You're going to have to go to a lot of competitions and lose a lot of competitions before your students start winning. So, as long as you think your kids can get through the day and can learn stuff and won't like cry or have a breakdown when they lose debates or get trounced in debates, that's when you should start competing. And that also depends on your kids. You might have some kids who are really unconfident, insecure, and will take losing really badly, and they might need a bit more time. And you might have some kids who are super egotistical and want to compete from week one, and they can compete a bit sooner. They'll still get trounced, but getting trounced might be good for them. Um, Obviously, I would never advise sending a child to a debating competition if they don't know what debating is. They've never done a debate before. They don't know what the format is. They don't know the criteria. You've just kind of like thrown them in the deep end of the pool. I wouldn't do that. I think it's not best practice. Um, I think but within that, within doing more competitions and doing competitions quite early on, a big mistake teachers make is doing lots of different types of debating competitions or lots of different types of debating. So some schools I see they do a lot of token oracy. So they do like one MUN conference a year, one mooting competition. Um, they do one sort of style based competition like the Mace or Worlds, a couple content based competitions like BP or Policy, and then they do some other weird stuff like Articulate. Well, I think this is definitely better than not doing any sort of oracy provision or public speaking competition or training. You're The problem with this is you're shifting the goalposts for your students every few weeks. If in October you're doing a style-based competition, but in November you're doing a competition where you're meant to have like a PowerPoint and a presentation, and in December it's mooting, so it's a lot more about um, sort of legalese rather than solid common sense argumentation, and then and then January doing MUN, and suddenly it's about knowing all the technicalities and the rules and how to refer to delegates and stuff. Like kids are just going to be bamboozled. The analogy I often use when I talk to teachers about this is if someone came to you as a personal trainer, let's say you're a personal trainer, and they were, overweight or unfit and they wanted to change that, you wouldn't tell them to do a different type of exercise every day for the next, 3 weeks or 4 weeks, right? You wouldn't say, okay, bench press Monday, go for a run Tuesday, go for a swim Wednesday, squat Thursday, play some tennis Friday, deadlift Saturday, use a rowing machine Sunday, go for a cycle on Monday. That'd be shockingly bad advice. And the reason that would be shockingly bad advice, apart from that would be too much, is they're not going to see meaningful improvement day to day, week to week, or month to month if they're doing all these different types of things. They're going to be learning how to do each type of thing, each new thing every day, and there's not going to be any time spent on just improvement. What you want to do is stick to one thing. In this analogy, say it was running, you'd want to say to them, okay, we're going to run 3 times a week. We're going to start out nice and slow, and we're going to add on 10% to every run. So we're going to go out for a little while on Monday, do a jog, just see what feels kind of challenging but not too bad. Then a couple of days, we're going to add 10% onto that run at the same pace, and we're going to add another 10% on the next run. And after 2 months, when we've got a decent distance, we're going to start speeding it up because that's consistent improvement. And the client would know what's expected of them. They would see an end goal. And yeah, in 2, 3, 4 months, when they're fit, when they've got an aerobic base, when they can go fast, when they know how to run, then you can like tell them to play football or basketball or tennis or put them in a row or throw them in a pool. And for advanced speakers, it's really good to have lots of different formats of oracy. But you need a base, a basic ability to give a basic speech and the confidence and the comfort to do that before you start throwing different uh, names of like delegates or different parlance or different formats or standing orders at them. So try to stick to one format, or at least a fairly consistent set of formats, when you're dealing with novice debaters. And I would define a novice debater as anyone who's been debating regularly for 2 years or less. Um, so that will be almost all the students you ever have. Very few students will properly debate for more than 2 years and get what I would consider to be intermediate, let alone advanced. In terms of the best format, I think BP is a great format, and we will talk about that in a future video, why that is. A big reason is just because it's content based and consistently judged. But try to pick a format that's common in your local area so you can do a lot of competitions. I think in your first year of being a coach, if you can do one competition a month, that's a really good place to start. Any less, I just don't think it's enough to really grow the club. Any more is going to be a lot of work for you. So another big mistake that teachers make is that they focus on style. So content is so much more important at the start. And if you're not sure what the difference is here, when we think of style, we think of how you are saying things. So that could be like tone, variation, eye contact, body language, humor, wit, sarcasm, emotion, stuff like that. And or using devices such as rhetorical questions or alliteration or things like that, anecdotes. Um, when we think of content, we think more of just the brass bones of what you're saying, your arguments, your analysis, your impacting, your structure, your prioritization, your rebuttal. It is almost impossible to have a stylistic speech where you are not saying anything worthwhile. And I would challenge you to try and find a good speech where the speaker is not making pretty relevant, interesting points. All my favourite speeches, I have been to the mountaintop, Obama's 2004 DNC address, um, Emma Watson's He for She, Admiral H. McRaven's University of Texas commencement. All of these speeches have within them solid content. The speaker has stuff to say and is saying it well. It's hard to say nothing stylistically. And most students, when they start public speaking, don't have anything worthwhile saying, or they don't know how to say it. You need to help them develop that content, that thinking, that explanation process before you make it stylistic. And so start with content, don't start with style. I promise you, it's a massive mistake. Um, Similar but slightly different is sometimes a coach it's really tempting to focus on fancier stuff, not just necessarily style, but even things like context setting or burden pushing or framing or advanced rhetoric or advanced oratorical techniques. Again, if you started coaching basketball tomorrow with kids who'd never played basketball before, you wouldn't be like day one how to slam dunk. You got to focus on the basics to start. The basics are everything. Just kind of a last one for competitions here. Don't always put your best students together. So you're going to want to do this a bunch of times because the good students are going to want to win, so they're going to want to be paired with other good students, and that's totally fair. But the best two students in your school aren't always going to make the best team. And on top of that, always remember that you want the biggest and strongest and the society with the most depth, the club with the most depth of skill that you can. You don't want 3 amazing kids and 50 kids who've got no clue. You want 24 solid debaters. Long term, that will get you not only the absolute best, but it'll just make the whole thing a lot more fun. A big part of doing that is going to be putting some weaker kids with some stronger kids for some competitions, just so the weaker kids can learn from the stronger kids, and the stronger kids can sometimes take stock of what they can't do well and maybe what they've been relying on a strong partner to help them with. So that's it. Thank you. This was a little bit longer than anticipated. I did say I would keep these to 10 minutes, so I apologise. Next week should be a short one. It's going to be how to set up a practice debate, so just some short, simple advice on setting up those quick lunchtime debates, or those quick after-school debates, or those competitive debates with other schools. Just ways to get debating as soon as you can and get the most out of the kids. So thanks so much. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below. Give us an email if you'd like us to get involved with your school. Until next time, keep debating.